Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfiel, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week I am really happy to be welcoming an author, a chef, a YouTuber, and a television host to the show. This week my guest is Pailin Chongchitnant, and I'm super excited to welcome you to the show, Pailin.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we dive into the interview, let's get to know Pailin a little bit better. She was born and raised in Thailand and worked as a chef before pivoting to become a YouTuber. So you may know her as the host of her YouTube cooking show, Hot Thai Kitchen, which recently hit 1 million subscribers. Congratulations, that's a big milestone.
Thank you.
She's also the author of the cookbook, Hot Thai Kitchen, and the host of the TV series, One World Kitchen. So this is a lady who does a lot of different things, but it has all come out of her love for food. So we're going to be talking a little bit about Pailin, how she got started, and a little bit about what she does. But later in the show, we're also going to be talking about Patreon, because this is something that she uses as an additional revenue stream in her business. And we get a lot of questions about Patreon, and I have questions about Patreon. So we'll be talking about that a little later on in the episode.
Sounds good.
So before we get started, one question that I ask everybody who comes on the show is, did you think of yourself or consider yourself or feel like you were creative as a kid?
Absolutely not. Not at all. And to be honest, I still don't think I am particularly creative. I think a lot of people think this, that they equate creative as being artistic, which is, I am not artistic. I can't draw, especially growing up with my two brothers who are extremely artistic. I was like the odd one out, so I've never considered myself as creative.
It's so funny how many people associate creativity with being able to draw. I'm always really fascinated by that.
Because it's the most obvious one when you're a kid.
I think so.
Right? It's like the first thing that you do, the first quote unquote artistic thing that you do as a child. Yeah. Now that I have a child, I know. And so like when a kid can really draw, it's like, oh, wow, you're really artistic and therefore creative. And so if you can't really draw, then you say the opposite, right? Oh, I'm not artistic and I'm not creative.
Yes.
And yeah, but still, I think now that I understand the meaning of creative to be a little wider than that, I still don't think I'm particularly creative.
That's funny. I think of cooking or being a chef as an extremely creative career. So that's...
Yeah, I guess so. But, it's funny because I find cooking to be a very scientific thing.
That there is a huge scientific component to it, for sure.
And it's a little bit of both. It's both creative and scientific. But when I think about cooking, a lot of times I'm very logical and methodical about it. It's like, what makes sense here? Even when I'm creating a dish, it's always in a logical manner that I'm creating it. It's like, let's say I'm picking a vegetable to go with this protein. I'm usually thinking about, what's the texture that's going to make sense? What's the flavor that's going to make sense? So to me, it's all about what's reasonable and logical as opposed to, let's try this one out because it's, that's how I feel creative people would do it differently. Is they would just want to try it just to see and just throw it in there and just see what happens. This looks interesting. Let's try it. You know what I mean?
So to me, creativity is, I think my basic definition of it is solving a problem, figuring out how to solve a problem. But really what you've described, your whole process is you're solving problems. You're figuring out, well, what will go with what and how will so it's my favorite question to ask because I get so many different answers and so many
everyone defines it a little differently, don't they? Yeah.
But yes, I would consider you to be very creative, whether you do or not. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in the world of cooking, because you were born and raised in Thailand. Whereabouts in Thailand are you from?
That's right. I was born and raised in the south of Thailand in a small city called Hat Yai. And I was always drawn to food. Like I always loved to eat. My mom never had issues getting me to eat anything except certain vegetables. And I've just always been drawn to the kitchen. Like we had a nanny who was also a family cook, and whenever she cooked, I always just wanted to be in there and helping with everything that she's doing, taking credit for family dinner when all I did was stir stuff around in a pot. So yeah, it's just been something that I was just naturally drawn to.
Did you actually go to school to become a chef, or was like?
Yes, yes. So when I first graduated high school, I didn't know that culinary school was a thing that one could do, because I was in Thailand, right? And I don't know, back then it's just not the same as things like being a chef wasn't as cool as it is today. So I had applied and got accepted to a nutritional sciences program at UBC. And I chose nutrition because it was the closest thing to food that I could do in university. And I distinctly remember being in the counselor's office, and like it was a done deal by that point, university and whatnot. And there was somebody from, I think, the Arts Institute of Seattle. This was in Thailand, okay? Like these
Oh,
people
really?
go all,
Okay.
yeah, these people go all over the world. And the Arts Institute of Seattle was there promoting their culinary program, among other things. And I was like, sorry, what is this program? Culinary program? What do you mean? It's like, oh, you learn to become a chef. It's a cooking program. And I was blown away. I was like, okay, when I'm done with this university thing, that's what I'm doing next. I was like, why didn't anyone tell me about this?
There's so much we don't know in high school. I feel like everybody should take a year off after high school just to find out about all this stuff that's out there that you can do.
Yeah, in Asia, and that school in particular was very academic, you know? So like doing anything not academic was not an option. It's not anything anybody ever talked about.
Right. So you came out here and went to school at UBC. Is that the same program that you would take to be like a dietitian?
It's a similar start. If you want to be a registered dietitian, you take one more year, and then you have to do different tests and things like that. So yeah, it's a similar start, but they're a little more specialized after that.
And did you wind up going to the Art Institute of Seattle for your culinary?
No. So after university, I started working in the restaurant industry right away. Just starting as a line cook, doing, starting from the bottom basically. And then after a couple of years of that, I decided, yeah, this is really what I want to do. So then I started thinking about going to culinary school, and eventually landed in San Francisco. There was a cordon bleu in San Francisco, which is no longer there, but I chose San Francisco because it seemed like a really good food city. And to me, it was important not to just be in the school, but also be immersed in an environment where you could really explore food, because I feel like that's really where a lot of the education happens. So when you go out and you eat, you try different things. I was accepted to the famous CIA in New York. And then when I found out how cold it was there, I gave up on the idea.
San Francisco can be pretty chilly too, though. It's damp.
Yeah, but there's no snowstorm.
There's no snow. Yes, they don't have winter in the same way.
And also because when I found out that it was so far remote, like that school is not in New York City, like it's very remote, and I thought, well, like there's nowhere for me to go on the weekend, and so again, like I thought about the whole experience of being there, not just the school. Then I decided to go to San Francisco. And then after that, I started working in the restaurant industry, but I started my YouTube channel while I was a culinary school student.
Oh, I didn't realize it went that far back. Okay.
Oh, yeah, it went back 2009.
So you're like an OG YouTuber.
An OG, exactly. I was a YouTuber before the word YouTuber was a thing.
What made you start the YouTube channel? Like, was it something that you did because you thought it would help you with school, or was it just sort of like on a lark? What gave you the impetus to?
So I had always wanted to have a cooking show. Growing up in Thailand, we had some TV shows that were sort of imported into like the cable TV, and there was Jamie Oliver, Nigella Lawson, and Gail Gand, who I don't know what she's up to these days.
No.
A lot of different TV personalities, and I was just so inspired by them. So completely inspired by not just the cooking, but the fact that they were doing a show about it. And to me, the whole thing was just like, this is exactly what I want to do when I grow up. But, how do you
become a famous
how do
TV?
you become a famous TV chef, right? Like, so it was just sort of a dream. And so when YouTube became a thing, my brother was the one who said that, hey, you always talk about wanting to be in a cooking show. No one's going to just find you working in a restaurant and put you on a TV show. So you could start doing your own show and putting it on YouTube. And the goal at the time was that it would be sort of a resume, which then I could use to go and either apply for other shows on TV, or somebody would come and discover me on YouTube, and then they would be like, hey, you're good. Do you want to go on TV? How innocent, right? But then after starting, I realized that, hey, I enjoy this as a thing in and of itself. Like, I don't really need it to lead to TV in order for it to be a fulfilling activity. So then, instead of it being a stepping stone to something else, it became the end unto itself. And then when I found out that you can monetize the YouTube channel, which didn't happen 2 years later, I did it just sort of for fun for a long time. Then I thought, oh, wait a minute, like this could actually be a career. So then that changed the perspective and the sort of the approach that I had towards the YouTube channel. Instead of it being just something that I was doing for fun, it was something that I worked on as a career.
That's a really interesting progression. Did you ever go back to the restaurant industry, or was it after you finished culinary school, did you sort of say, well, this is the direction I'm going to go? Or
no, because you don't make any money from YouTube for a long time. So after culinary school, I worked in the restaurant industry in San Francisco for a few years, and then I came back to Canada because I'd got my PR here, and I had met my now husband at the time, who was Canadian. So I just moved from the US here. I'm very happy I've done that, just saying. And when I moved back, I kind of reevaluated what I wanted to do, and I was burnt out from the restaurant industry. I worked very hard in San Francisco. I was opening a restaurant, and that was very taxing. And it really drained me. And I thought that if I wanted to have a family, the schedule of being a restaurant chef doesn't work for you to have children. And, and if you have a husband that works 9 to 5, like you never see each other. And I know that because I had, people who worked with me who they were doing that, basically taking shift between them and their partner, and they never saw each other except for on their days off, which was not the life that I wanted. So I really reevaluated what I wanted to do with my cooking passion. The YouTube channel was not a viable business at the time, not even close, and I didn't know if it ever would be. So I ended up then pivoting into home economics teaching. So I went back to school, got a degree in education, specializing in home ec. Because in BC, this is not true of other provinces, but in BC, home ec is 90% food. Yes. It's such a popular elective now in high school because of the rise of like celebrity chefs and all that, and kids love to cook. And so I thought, hey, like this is cooking and teaching people how to cook, similar to what I was doing online, but this is in real life. And so I felt like I had a knack for teaching. So that's what I ended up doing. But I only was able to teach for maybe a year before the YouTube channel became a full-time thing. And so I pivoted full-time into YouTube then.
Oh, that's really, I didn't know you had been a teacher in.
Yeah, so I had a little mid-level career between being a chef and being a YouTuber. That was actually a really good transition. Because let me tell you, the hardest people to teach cooking to is high school students.
Yep.
In every way.
I was the last year to go through grade 8 where only girls could take home ec in BC.
Really?
So, yes, the year after that.
That was a thing.
Yep. It was, you did the first half of the semester was cooking and the second half was sewing, and girls couldn't take woodworking or electronics. And then the year after that, they opened it up, which I think was well overdue. And my high school that I went to actually had a culinary arts program that you could go into if you wanted to pursue a career. It was one of the first schools to do a specialty program, and the CA program ran the school cafeteria. We had amazing food in our cafeteria, which is not a normal school experience.
There are a few schools like that, and they are lucky.
Yeah, it was very, very good food. But yes, if you can teach high school students, you can teach anybody.
Especially when they're not in the room with you.
That's right. I wonder how many of them actually watch you while they're supposed to be paying attention in their high school cooking class. That would be interesting.
I've gotten comments before. I went by Miss Chong when I was in high school, and I've gotten comments before from previous students like, Miss Chong, it's me. It's very cute. It's very cute.
If you have not checked out Pai's YouTube channel, I highly recommend it. I have to say, you are the person who brought me into the YouTube ecosystem. This was years ago when your first book came out, and my business partner Ethan interviewed you for a piece we wrote on you.
That's right. Yeah.
And he came back from the interview and he said, you've got to watch her YouTube channel. And I was so not interested in YouTube. And I'm like, watch it later. Like I don't like YouTube. I don't want to blah, blah, blah. And he's like, just watch it. Just watch a couple episodes. And I was like, okay. And so one weekend I sat down, and the next thing I knew, 2 hours had gone by, and I had been watching your channel, and I was just charmed by it. Like I felt like, wow, she is so down to earth. She takes a cuisine that I have always been intimidated by and makes it like, I feel like I could go into my kitchen right now and whip something up. And that was, and that's when I started paying more. And now I probably watch YouTube more than I watch TV or Netflix or anything really. So I have a very good friend who has taught, or has learned, not taught himself, he has learned how to cook Thai food from you. He loves your channel. So he mentions it quite often. So
good to hear, like, real people.
Yeah.
Not that viewers are not real people, but like people that I actually know.
It's
you know what I mean? Like it makes it so much more real to hear that, like, oh, someone watches my show, or I run into somebody on the street who comes up to me and say, hey, I watch your show. It, like, every time that happens, it just makes it so much more real. How impactful, like, the show can be to somebody just that you would never otherwise meet in real life.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken something that it's always a little intimidating to cook a cuisine that you're not familiar with, regardless of what type of cuisine it is, and just from an ingredient perspective and all those things, and you are able to take that and make it so approachable and comfortable, and I think that's I think there are people who have a gift for that, and I definitely think you're one of those people who just seems to have a knack for making it fun. And
thank you.
Cool. So yes, if you haven't watched her channel, I highly recommend that you go check it out. But once you sort of got to the point where this could become a full-time thing, you mentioned earlier that you changed your mindset a little bit about how you were going to move forward with it, and I'm just curious, like, what were some of the things that you started to take into consideration at that point?
Consistency was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
So before, like, I would put up a video whenever I had time, and I swear there was a 1 year gap or something where I was so busy opening the restaurant that there was no way I could do anything else. But it didn't matter to me, because to me it was just like a hobby, right? You did it when you had time, and if you didn't, you didn't. But when I decided that it was going to be something to pursue seriously, then I had to make it a priority. So we started doing a video every other week, and I saw the viewership and the engagement go up significantly as soon as the consistency went up. And I know that's partly the algorithm as well. Like, if I don't know if that's still true, the algorithm changes all the time, but if you produce video regularly, YouTube recognizes your channel as like, oh, this is a serious channel with regular content, so they're going to sort of support it more and push it out more to other people. And also, as far as the viewer is concerned, they come across and they see, oh, this channel has videos regularly, I'm going to subscribe. because I know to expect more from this channel. So that really made a huge difference. And also getting a website. I didn't have a website. I didn't even have written recipes anywhere because I was like, why do you need written recipe? You can see everything I'm doing on the video. So getting a website and signing up as an actual business and things like that. So yeah, so it became serious. That was around 2012, I think, that it became serious, but it wouldn't be until maybe 2015 when it became a viable full-time income.
So when you decided to quit teaching and go full time, what were the signals you were getting that this was like, this is the time to pivot?
Well, one thing I had to think about is if I lost all income from teaching, can I live on just the YouTube income? And the answer was yes. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. And the other thing was the time pressure, because I was only doing on call for teaching at the time, and I would feel so pressured to like either choose to go teach or work on the channel. And the stress of having to choose that and the anxiety of all of that became too much. And I started to think about, okay, this is not good for either thing. I should be committed to I should have the mental capacity to do both. And so that was when the anxiety of getting a call to go teach was getting too much. That's when I thought, okay, this is too much. Yeah, those were the two things.
I think there's something to be really said for that. This was a conversation I was just part of in a Facebook group actually earlier this week, is when do you know it's time to make the leap? Because I think you do hit this point where you're like, I can't go any further with either one of these things if I keep doing them both. And the one that you truly are committed to, it may not be giving you enough income right now to live the life that you want, but it's never going to give you more income if you don't sort of jump off that cliff and go all in. So I think that's an important thing from a mindset perspective. If you are listening and you're sort of in that situation right now, there does come a point where you really have to just step off the cliff and hope the net appears underneath you.
Yeah, and be smart about it, right?
Yes,
like don't quit your day job until you know that you can really count on your income. You may have to make certain cuts to your budget, but as long as you're not going to go homeless anytime soon, then you're good to go.
Don't jump off the cliff if you have $50,000 in credit card debt, or
exactly.
Be smart about it. But there does come a point where you do have to just decide if you're going all in or not, and go with it. So you went all in, and at that point, how were you monetizing through YouTube? Was it simply ad revenue through, or? Yeah,
it's always been the same. The monetization model has always been the same. So the ad revenue from YouTube is the main thing. Right. I wasn't monetizing my website at the time because actually I didn't even know. I mean, I knew that you could, but I was with AdSense.
Oh,
because that's where everybody starts, and AdSense makes you no money. But that's sort of what I thought. That's kind of what I thought people made. Like, people didn't make much money. But anyway, that's a separate story. But that's YouTube ad revenue was the biggest chunk. And then every once in a while, I'll get gigs to do cooking demos here and there. Back when we used to be able to gather in large groups, cooking festivals, things like that. I didn't do too many sponsored content then because the channel wasn't that big and it's such a small niche that I didn't get a lot of sponsors. I started Patreon in 2017, which is that was maybe a year and a half, 2 years after after I'd gone full time. Okay. But the YouTube ad revenue has always been the biggest chunk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Around this time, and I'm not sure which came first. I think it was your book that came first, but it was around this time where you got the opportunity to write your first cookbook, and you also had the opportunity to be one of the co-hosts of One World Kitchen. Did those sort of happen at the same time? Or?
Yeah, I think they did actually happen around the same time, because I remember talking to the publisher about the TV show. So the show happened when the book was in the works already. Yeah, and so the book, actually, I started writing the book independent of the publisher.
Oh,
I
okay.
had no, I had been told somewhere along the lines by a quote unquote famous food writing teacher that the rejection rate of cookbook proposal was 97%, which may or may not be true. It's probably true.
It's quite high, I'm sure, but I don't know if it's that
But
high.
that put into my head that it's virtually impossible. And so I wasn't going to go through the trouble of trying to get published by a publisher, and I was just going to self-publish. So I started writing the book, and the book was basically done. And when it was done, I started to look into printing options. See, like this has always been my MO, is you do it first, you figure out all the details later.
I was just going to say, this is a lesson for anyone listening here, is that, you know what? You want a cooking show? Create your own cooking show. You want to write a book? Write a book. Like,
and it was actually my brother who told me to start the cooking show. I was talking to him about writing a book, and I was like sort of fretting over some details, and he said, "You know what? Just write it in a Word document, and when you're done, when you have a book, then you start worrying about other things. Because as far as he was concerned, if you don't even have a book, like we're not having this conversation." You know? And
your
so I
brother's
thought,
a
you know what,
smart
that's
guy.
good. This is, I don't even have a book. So why am I worrying about how to print it? Just write the darn thing. It's going to have to get written one way or the other. So I wrote it, I photographed it, I designed everything myself back when I had time. Well, my husband taught me how to use InDesign and helped me design the book, but I went and laid out all the pages myself.
That's right. Your husband is a graphic designer, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes. So,
Which comes in very, very handy.
yes.
He was busy. He couldn't like lay the book out himself, but he's like, I can teach you certain things, and then you have to do it yourself. And then I took a course on lynda.com and how to use InDesign, how to lay out a book in InDesign. But if you have a copy of my book, I touched every single page on InDesign of that book.
Wow, there's not very many cookbook authors who can say that.
And then when I was done, I realized that printing the book was going to be a lot more expensive than I thought to do it yourself.
Yeah, cookbooks are challenging in that respect from a self-publishing perspective.
Because they're full color, right? So then I went to talk to a consulting company who basically took a look at the book and said, you need to pitch this because this has potential. And I thought, oh, okay, sure. And so they pitched the book and it got picked up, and then I didn't have to worry about printing it anymore.
And you actually are working on your second cookbook right now.
That's right. Yeah.
That's very exciting. So, yeah, and the book did very well, if I recall. I recall it being very popular. So the book was called Hot Thai Kitchen. And it's still available out there. I still see it on people's bookshelves.
Yeah, it's still getting printed. I think we're on the 4th or 5th printing of the book now.
That's great. For a Canadian cookbook to have 5 printings is really quite something. So and then how did the TV, because here you were, you got your book out, and now you've got a TV show.
So the TV show, so the YouTube ended up doing exactly what I had originally wanted it to do, was being a sort of a thing that people could discover. And so Gusto TV, which was a new TV network at the time, they were looking to make their original content, and they were wanting to do one on international cuisines. And so they were looking for Canadian cooks and chefs who were representing the cuisines around the world. And then they found me. And so they reached out to me and they said, do you want to do this thing? And I thought, sure. And it's funny because at the time I no longer was pursuing TV. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't even my radar anymore because YouTube had replaced that. But just as soon as I stopped worrying about it, it showed up.
Funny how that works.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? I think you actually had to travel for that. You didn't stay in Vancouver to shoot that.
Yeah, I had to go to Ottawa. It was a very different experience. It's very fun, and I learned a lot, but it was a marathon. It was like 7 days of intense filming, long days, and doing things for TV. It's different. It's a very different thing from doing your own show because there's somebody else's vision that you're fulfilling. Right. And that was the hardest thing, I think, was having a director.
Mm.
The director was great, don't get me wrong, but it was also like this. I have never done a show where I didn't decide what it was going to look
Yeah.
like.
It's just very different going from your vision to somebody else's vision when you're
And
used to being in
mhm.
charge.
Yeah, and I think it would have been different if I had no cooking show experience
Mm.
before, and then I would have had no expectation. But that was the biggest struggle, was like, okay, having to actually discuss my decisions on what to do and how to say certain things, because in my head I was like, why don't I get to make all these decisions? Like I'm cooking this thing. But that's not how a cooking show works, right? Like they've got a whole team of people who there's multiple people making decisions on
Yeah.
what they want the show to look like. So you lose a certain amount of control, at least at that level anyway. I'm sure if you're Jamie Oliver, you get to do whatever you want.
He's
But
probably an executive producer on his own
exactly.
shows or something like that.
When you're just the talent, you don't get quite the same amount of control.
So now that you've done both and you got to fulfill your dream of being on a cooking show or hosting a cooking show, which do you prefer?
I prefer YouTube, hands
Yeah.
down. No question about it. Not to say that I wouldn't do TV again. TV was a fun experience in a different way. But as far as if I could only do one, no question about it, it would be YouTube. Most importantly, it's a much more personal platform.
I think that's why people connect with YouTube so much, is it really does feel like these are, the production value isn't perfect. And that's part of what makes it so approachable, I think. Like you feel like this is somebody, and you've been very upfront about this. You film in your friend's kitchen.
Yeah.
And he's in a small apartment in Vancouver. And, and there's just something about it that it's like, okay, if she's cooking this in a tiny kitchen that doesn't have massive countertop islands and every fancy appliance, and she can do this, I can do it.
Yeah, totally. And then I make mistakes on camera and we don't have to always, get rid of it. We can show it. And also I get to hear directly from viewers what they think about it, which is something that was very odd for me for the TV show to be going out, and I have
no idea how it was.
There's no comment section on TV.
No.
So it was an odd experience for me in that sense. It's like I want to know what people think. And there was no direct way for me to do that. And so there's a big disconnect between the product going out and not being able to actually converse with people.
Yeah, I could see
about it afterwards. Yeah.
Podcasting is very similar. There's many times where I can see the download numbers, and that's kind of it, because there's nowhere for people to comment. There's nowhere for people.
Right, they'd have to go on like a social media platform.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting. Sometimes I'm like, does anybody care what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yeah. I know. There should be a comment section on Apple Podcasts.
There should be something. I don't know. I have actually thought about putting the podcast on YouTube. But there is quite an audience for podcasts on YouTube, which I would never have considered, particularly when I don't do video with this, but apparently there is. And so I was just thinking about that last week, actually.
My husband always listens to podcasts on YouTube.
Yeah, it's just there's just some people who have YouTube on in the background all the time, and that's just their platform that they listen on. Yeah, so YouTube has really brought you a lot of different things in your life that you had really hoped for, and I think it's a platform that I just started a very tiny YouTube channel. I'm for my art business, so I have 3 videos and 15 subscribers. Pie.
Oh, that's 5 subscribers per video. Great stat.
But one of the things I was super curious about is the selling aspect of YouTube, which I had never considered from an art perspective. I follow, which is funny because I watch a lot of art YouTubers, but I had gotten a lot of questions about how I lay out my planner that I use, and I use my own planner stickers that I design, and I was like, well, you know what, I'll just make a video. And that was the first one. I put it up on YouTube, and I had $100 worth of sales within a day.
My gosh.
I know, from like 40 views. So it just really kind of showed me that it's one thing to put art out there, but it's another thing when you can actually show people how to
Yes.
use the products that you're creating and
Yes.
how much that it can impact their buying decisions. Like, yes, I will buy this, but also now I know how to use it. Like, oh, that's a great idea. I've never thought of using a sticker for that or whatever. So I just found it really fascinating.
And you know what? There's lots of avenues. I'm just going to tell you another story. So my brother, who just started a YouTube channel too, actually, and I'll plug his channel right now. He started sculpting.
Oh, cool.
He's got a sculpting channel. He's highly, highly talented, and he started picking it up during COVID. And he's only got a couple videos up so far, and people have offered to buy his sculpture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So if the YouTube channel wasn't your goal and you wanted to actually sell the actual product and you make a video of you making the product, so many people would be interested and there'd be so much more value to the product because it's like that's the thing that he or she made
yeah.
in that video.
Yeah, that was the second video I did, was a behind the scenes of how I did my Valentine's Day card launch. I launched a small line of 80s inspired Valentine's Day cards, and I did a little YouTube video of how I made them, because I make them all in my studio, and again, yeah, I had a little sales spike from that, and I just thought, like, there is something about the connection on YouTube,
Yes.
and I think there's far more power in it than most of us think off the cuff. I'm sure you're very aware of it because you've been doing this for so long, but for me, I was like, wow, this is so cool. I've always sort of thought of YouTube more as an informational type of thing. Like, I want to learn how to cook a dish, or I want to see how to fix something on my toilet, or stuff
I
like
don't
that.
know how anybody fixed anything before YouTube, to
I
be honest.
know.
When your house is falling apart, I don't know what people ever did before.
When we were kids, the house my parents bought had an unfinished basement, and my dad finished the whole thing. And I was thinking about it not that long ago. I'm like, how did he do that without YouTube?
Right? Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, but there's definitely something there about making a connection, and I think that's a bit of a segue into talking about Patreon, because that's an avenue that you have gone down to create another revenue stream, which I think is really smart. I think it gets a little scary sometimes to rely on one revenue stream. You never know.
Yes. Yes.
But Patreon comes across to me as something where you really do have an even deeper connection with the people who are
100%.
Yes. I've talked about Patreon on the show quite frequently, but maybe you could just give us like a quick capsule version of how it works, like what it actually is.
Sure. Patreon is a platform basically where people can go and support the creators that they love, financially support creators that they love. And it started out, I think, as, people were putting all their art online, like YouTube and things like that. But unless you have significant amount of views, the money just wasn't that great. And people were struggling to keep going with their art because they were having to keep up a day job and everything. And so this just sort of offered an alternate solution and say, hey, here's something that you can put up. And if your viewers, your audience really loves and support your art, they can directly support you through this platform. And the word Patreon comes from the word patron, which I didn't even know about, patron of the arts, where back in the day when, painters would paint things and people with money would just give them money so that they could do their art, and not necessarily to buy the art, but just to support their career. So it's the same idea where people come across my cooking show and they can see that the show takes resources to produce, and if they want to be a part of that and support it to help out in small financial ways, they can just pledge any amount, even $1 a month or 20 or 50, it doesn't matter. They can do that, and then in return the creators will set up different perks where if you give $1 a month, you have access to this little extra thing, or if you give $5 a month, you get a little bit more. The tiers are there as an incentive, but to me, Patreon is more about the people who love to support your art, and the perks are bonuses that they get.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I subscribe to a couple of different Patreons, and quite frankly, I really don't care if I get the perks. Like, that's not why I'm there. I like your work, and I want you to keep doing it because it makes me happy. So I think the perks are great, but I do really think that there's a lot of people who just genuinely want to support things that they love to see, and they don't want them to go away. It's a great way to show the people who are creating that you value what they do. So
and I should mention that there are creators who the kinds of things that they offer really is the incentive. And I think it's different for different kinds of creators. Like some artists will offer art downloads or something that's why people sign up, is they want the thing.
Yes.
So that exists. So there's two sort of different approaches that you can take. You can approach it with here's the perks that you can get, or hey, just like support me and here's some things I'm offering as a thank you, but like people are not paying $5 a month for that thing.
Right.
Yes.
So there are multiple platforms out there that do this. I know there's like coffee or I don't know if it's supposed to be coffee or Ko-fi. I think it's supposed to sound like coffee, but it's spelt Ko-fi. And other platforms like that out there that allow you to do similar things. Do you use more than one, or do you just stick
No, until you mentioned that, I'd never even known about Ko-fi or coffee. I had to look it up. No, Patreon was the first one in the game, I think, and it became popular amongst YouTubers. And so that was the first one that I came across, and I've been with them, and I'm just really happy with the way they are run. Like, they're not perfect, obviously, but I feel like the people who run it have the artist's best interest in mind. And they're also understanding of patrons as well. So I just like them as a company in general. YouTube now has something similar built right in called memberships. So now if you go on a YouTube channel, you might see a button called join.
Yes,
and it's basically the same thing where people can pledge a certain amount and then they get different perks and whatnot. I don't like that as much because YouTube takes a lot more than Patreon does, and just on principle, I feel it's too much. Patreon, I think, takes only 5% or something small, but YouTube takes 30% of all of people's quote unquote donations, which I really think is not right. Like, people are giving money to supporting the artist. Exactly. Yes. Does it really cost you 30% to run that feature? You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me to be just philosophically wrong for them to take 30%, which is a shame because I think for the feature to be built right into YouTube, I probably would get a lot more money because people don't have to make the leap to a different platform.
Right.
But this is one thing that I'm just not been super happy about. I've considered doing both just so that if people don't want to go to another platform, they have the option. Like, it doesn't hurt to have options. Right. So it's something I've been thinking about. More options for the viewers is always better, but it's like the 30% is like
I wonder
it's a bit of a holdout for me.
I wonder if subscribers on YouTube realize it's that much. I mean, it's sort of like when you give to a charity and you find out that 50% of what you gave went to overhead, and you're kind of like, well, that's not what I thought was happening to my money. So
and even with charity, people understand that there are costs to hire employees, but YouTube already makes money on all these other ways.
Yes.
Right? Like this, and they're not a nonprofit. This is like money that people expect to go directly to support the creator, and 30% of that I think is a bit much.
Yeah. No, one of my questions was, when people give via Patreon, does all the money come to you? And I was fully expecting there to be a fee that goes to Patreon,
right?
They're providing a service, which
they've got to exist somewhere.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So I was curious. I did not know YouTube charged that much, so that's interesting.
Patreon only charges 5%, I think, or it's something that I don't consider
which I think is quite
that
reasonable.
I consider to be very reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you started your Patreon account, I think in 2017, you said?
That's right.
And was it just something that was new and you're like, I'm going to try this out? Or did you actually have some thought behind it? Like, okay, I think I have an audience that's big enough that this would make some sense. Or were you getting
Yeah.
questions from people like, is there a way I can support you?
I wasn't getting questions about ways I could well, I was in a way that people were like, "Oh, where can I buy your book? Like, do you have merch?" Like
Right,
people would ask things like that. But things like Patreon wasn't in the consciousness of people just yet because there
right.
wasn't anything like it. So when the thing became available, I thought that I had a big enough audience to make this a viable thing, not just then I'll end up with two
Two
people
people.
over.
Two people and $2 a month.
Exactly. So I thought, well, let's give it a try because, hey, why not? And I did get some questions about it. There was actually some negative feedback, not a lot, but because people just weren't really used to the
Yeah.
idea, and they were just like, what is this thing? Like you're asking for money. And people just like there were some people who didn't feel good about it, which looking back, I really don't understand why you would complain about things like that because they're already getting the content for free. I'm not taking anything away. I'm only offering something else
Right.
for an additional like donation amount if you are willing to support. But for some reason, there's always going to be some people who dislike a new thing that you do, right? But for some reason, there were a few people who were like, I don't like it that you're asking people for money. Um,
I think there was a point still, I think that was still sort of the stage of the internet where people were very used to everything being free. Like,
yes,
and
I
it
think
was kind
so.
of cheeky of you to,
Yeah,
ask for
yeah.
money. How dare you kind of thing without necessarily thinking about or understanding like all the time and resources that go into producing that
Yeah, I don't think you'd
free.
have that problem now.
No, I think,
Not at all. But because I was an early adopter,
yeah.
it was some people just like didn't understand the concept of it. And I didn't understand, well, I don't understand how you could just like sit there and expect things to be handed to you for free.
Yeah, I think the internet had trained them well at that point, and now
I
it's
think
just our
so.
job to
Yeah.
train them in a different direction.
Yeah, I know. But now I don't get any complaints anymore. And on that subject, actually, the same with sponsors. Like back in the day when you used to do
Yes.
sponsored content, there'll be people getting all upset that you were being sponsored by a product.
Yeah.
But now I never get any feedback like that
Yeah, it's so
anymore.
interesting how it's
Yeah.
evolved over really a very short time when you
Yeah.
think
And
about it.
I even feel like some small sort of influencers want to even pretend that they're being sponsored because it's like a badge of honor when
Yes,
somebody I've seen that
I've
before
heard
when
that
it
happens.
it looks like it's a sponsored
But
post,
it's not.
but there's no indication anywhere that that actually
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of turned around 180 where back in the day we were trying to make it as subtle as possible that it's a sponsored post.
And now it's kind of like it validates that you know what you're talking about. Like somebody else
Exactly.
wants to work with you. So
Exactly. It's become a validation that
yeah,
like, oh, like people respect what you do.
exactly. Do you remember around what kind of subscriber count you had when you decided to launch your Patreon?
Oh, I think it was in the hundreds of thousands,
Okay.
maybe in the one or 200,000, something like that, or
Right.
in the few hundreds of thousands. Yeah,
So, do you think there's a point where it's too early to
absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I've
You
heard.
do
And
not want to end up with two patrons
no, it's not a doesn't
because
look great.
no, not, and you might wonder, well, hey, that's like $10 free that I didn't have before. No, but you have to think about the fact that it's not, it requires time on your part
Yes.
to have Patreon. And so one of the things that I offer for my Patreon members is they get my priority. If they have any question, they send me a direct message. I will answer them before I answer anybody else on any other platform. And so that requires time. And also, I offer all the perks. I offer bonus contents. I make another version of the video without ads or sponsor message that they get to access. So it does require you to put in time and effort, as it should, right? Like these are people who are supporting you financially. So if you only have a few patrons, it doesn't really justify the amount of time because you still have to offer the amount of work that you put in is gonna not be that much less.
Right, whether it's
You
$10
know what I mean?
or
Like if you're
$1,000.
offering,
Yeah.
exactly, if you're offering bonus content, you have to make that bonus content, whether you've got 5 people or 50 people watching that bonus content. So it's got to be worth your time. So I always think about it, okay, all this extra effort that you're doing for Patreon, how much is that worth in time? And is it more or less than the amount of money that you're getting from Patreon? Because if it's less, then it doesn't make any sense. And you've
Right.
just created another job for yourself that doesn't pay very well.
Yes.
Right. Having
And
said that, everybody starts somewhere. So in the beginning, of course, there's going to be like, a period where it's not a lot, but it should be at a point where it will build up to something that makes sense for you to do.
exactly. It's been really interesting to watch. There's one art YouTuber. I'm not actually a patron of hers, but she has taken some very long breaks from YouTube and for various reasons, and yet her Patreon, which is she brings in 5 figures a month from her Patreon, so she does very well with it. That's her first priority, and she's made that very clear. Like, these are the people, even when I can't be on YouTube, these are the people who get my time. They still get a video every month. They still get
Yes.
this and this and this, and because they're paying me.
Yes. Yes.
They're paying me to
Yes,
show up,
absolutely.
and that's
Yeah.
my first. So that was one of my questions: is like how much extra time per month do you think that you probably put in to support your Patreon?
Mm, well, I have to say that like you can make it as time consuming as you want, right? Because you get to design the perks. So for every video that I post, I do one bonus content, which I have to plan, film, and edit, and that probably takes a couple of hours. And then I do 2 of that a month, so that's 4 hours. And then in between, there's little bits of answering questions and things like that I do for people. So it probably adds up to about 5 hours, 6 hours a
Okay.
month. Yeah,
So it's not a crazy amount, like it's a manageable amount, but it's 5 hours of your time that you could be doing other things. But
that's right. And
yeah.
if you're starting, you have to think about like what is your hourly rate,
Mm-hmm.
the theoretical
Theoretically,
hourly
yeah.
rate. And if you're spending 5 hours and you're getting $20,
Mm-hmm.
so maybe that's too early to be starting a Patreon page.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, is from an hourly rate perspective. Yeah.
So I've been a supporter of another Patreon page where she had like literally 23 people, and she was offering like 5, 6, 7 different very complex tiers
Yeah.
of words. And I remember looking at that and I was just like, this doesn't make any sense for her. Like I love what she was doing. It was a podcast about giving birth and whatnot. And she was just so great. And when I was pregnant, I really wanted to support her. But I looked at the number of Patreons that she had and the kinds of complex things she was offering. I said, this makes no financial sense. Um,
That's something I
and
wonder about when I'm looking at a lot of Patreon pages. Is they'll have like 10 tiers, and it's like, wow, how do you keep track of all of that? It
yeah,
just seems
exactly.
like an awful lot. I do know in the art world, where a lot of people will send you like something physical, like a print or a greeting card or something. Some of them
Yeah.
will have 2 tiers that are essentially the same. One's a domestic shipping, one's an international shipping kind of thing. I get
Oh,
that. But some of them, yeah, they're so complicated. And when you started, I'm trying to remember what you had on your Patreon page the last time I looked. I think you have 4 tiers.
I have 3 tiers.
3
I have a
tiers.
1, a 3, and a 5. And I keep it pretty low because I want it to be accessible to
Right.
people. The $1 is there basically just to say, hey, if you just want to support me,
Here you
just
go.
do the
Yeah.
$1. And you don't have a lot of money, just do the $1. And I actually really appreciate my $1 patrons because those are the people who want nothing in return.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't get anything. They probably don't have much money, but they still want to support. They still get my priority. If they ask me a question, I'll still like that's something definitely they get, but
Right.
they don't get any bonus content or anything like that. The $3 level, they get all of the priority support, and they also get the recipes early. So once I have the recipes done and ready to go, I'll post it there, and they don't have to wait for the video to come out. And then for the $5, that's when like quote unquote real perks start to come, where they'll get actual bonus content and also the ad-free version of the video, which is a new thing that I started doing
Yeah,
recently. Yeah.
that's a nice little perk there to be
Mhm.
able to see that. I've seen a few YouTube Patreon pages who have started doing that, and I like that. I think that's a cool way to do that. So how do you market this? Like, how do you encourage people to sign up? Because they do physically have to leave YouTube and go to
Yeah.
another platform and sign up.
And I have to say that I don't do this very well myself. It's definitely something that I could do better on, and I've done. Um, I'll tell you the thing that I've done before that worked much better was if I plan what the bonus content was going to be in advance, and I can talk about the bonus content during my video. So I can say, oh, for those of you who are Patreon members, for this episode, I'm going to talk about X. And then they're like, oh, let me go check that out. And if it's something that perks their interest, they'll go over. Usually right now, I am not organized enough to plan my bonus content before I film. And that's just like a result of life being way too busy with a baby and all this stuff. And so I haven't been doing that. So I just say it at the end, where thanks to Patreon members who support the show. If you want to know what that's all about, check out the link in the description below. And then in the description, there's always a link to Patreon. I put a link to Patreon at the end of my recipes on the website, things like that. But I don't do nearly enough. And it's also like a little bit uncomfortable, right? It's not something, it's not like, hey, buy my book. It's not it's a bit of a more sensitive issue, so you have to know how to talk about it. But as I said, now I think people are warming up to the idea more, so I could probably do it more on a regular basis, like on social media, just as an, hey, FYI, if you didn't know, there's this thing here.
It's interesting what you just said about having a specific thing that you're offering that month, or to kind of, because now that I'm thinking back on the accounts that I am subscribed to, that's how they got me. Like that, it's like, okay, this month, this is what my patrons are getting. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm going to go check you out. Whether or not I wanted the thing, it was what perked my interest and got me going over to have a look and saying, like, what is this all about? What is she doing? So that's interesting that you mentioned
that. I should do that more, just because it's good to have all your content planned out anyway. But also I think it would bring more attention to Patreon in general. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. You're close to 350 patrons. About how long did it take you to kind of get to that mark? And do you get a lot of churn? Like, do you have people drop out and new people sign up, or?
Yes. So 350, I've been on Patreon since 2017. I did change my reward tier level a couple years ago, and that really increased the amount of signups. When I started doing actual bonus content for each episode, that really increased. I don't even remember what I was doing before, but it wasn't very good as perks. But now I think the perks are a little more interesting to people. And what was the other question? Do I have a lot of churn?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, but the net total still goes up every month. So people, a few people will drop off every month, but a little bit more than that will sign on every month.
Okay.
And I totally get the churn is totally normal. Like people's financial status change. Yep. But also, like, sometimes you just, and I don't really watch this anymore, right? Yeah. Like, you used to be really into a show, and then after a while you're like, oh, I'm not really into that anymore, and you leave. So I've done that with other creators on Patreon myself as well. And it's not anything, like, if that happens, like, there's not anything wrong with you necessarily, but if you're netting negative, then you might have to think about, okay, what is it that I'm doing on Patreon that is not making people happy to stay?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
the perks you're offering is not enough. You're not being as engaged with them, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think. Particularly from a financial perspective, I think when you're supporting something like a patron account or something like that, that's sort of like a nice to have in your budget. But
Exactly.
those are the things that get cut first when you need to cut back. So I think that's quite normal. Do you have plans to expand it though in the future?
I do. I've always wanted to like do a $10 tier where I could do maybe like a live session or something like that. But again, with that, I really need a minimum amount of people to make it not awkward and end up with like a one-on-one conversation with somebody, which I have been a part of with the Patreon account that didn't have enough people to do a live, and then they did a live, and there was literally like 2 people on the call. It was a little awkward.
Right.
And so I think once the numbers justify something like that, I might do another tier where there's a live element.
Yeah. I could see that working really well for the type of content that you do. I mean, a live cooking demo or something like that would be a lot of fun. Actually, it'd be like going to a cooking class.
Yeah, a live cooking demo or even like a live Q&A, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've been on the platform for 3 or 4 years at this point, and for people who are thinking about this and are thinking like this could be a really good avenue for me, what's your favorite and your least favorite part about using the platform?
I don't have a least favorite.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question when you sent it ahead of time, but I was thinking about what do I not like about Patreon, and really nothing. They're a great company. And if you're thinking of other platforms, then, that's a different thing that I can't comment on. But Patreon is a great company, but the concept itself, I think it's just so great for creators. It's a place where people can, this is my favorite thing about it, it's a place where people can directly show their appreciation for the work that you do, even if you've got nothing to sell.
Yeah.
Right. So for content creators, there's nothing for you to sell. So how do you know that people are really enjoying you? Well, this is how you know.
Yeah.
Right. So I that's what I love about it. It becomes a direct connection between you, your art, and the people who are appreciating them.
Yeah, I think that sums it up very nicely. It's the whole 1,000 true fan concept, right? There's those people that just want to connect with you, show you that they love what you do and support you. And I think at the same time, as artists and creatives, we want to be able to, what's the word I'm looking for? We want to be able to connect with those people who do love what we do. Like, we want to be able to have those conversations with them and just be able to appreciate what they're giving us in return.
And I'll tell you another thing that I love about Patreon is like on social media and on YouTube and all this, there's just so much noise.
Yes.
Right? Like, I have a lot of viewers and but the comments that come in, like there's a lot of not great comments to wade through, right? But when you're on Patreon, these people have like filtered themselves out in some way.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good
these
way
are
to
the people
describe it.
who they're not just crazy randos on the internet trolling and leaving ridiculous comments. These are people who know you, love you, understand you. And so the kind of engagement that you get on Patreon, it's like high quality engagement.
Yeah.
I never have to answer ridiculous questions on Patreon.
Yeah.
Whereas with other social media platforms, there's always like questions that I'm like, really?
Yeah, and YouTube is known for
that.
For having some. There's a lot of people who just have nothing nice to say, but they feel they need to say it anyway, and you wouldn't get that on a Patreon feed in the same way that you would.
Yeah, just the quality of engagement, it's just so much higher. So it's very refreshing
Yes.
for me to be on Patreon. And I know when I get a message on Patreon, it's a good question,
Yeah.
solid question that people have. Like I get a lot of people who just don't read the recipe and they'll ask the questions that are already answered in the recipe kind of thing, where they'll just ask the questions first without even doing their own reading.
Yes.
And we don't get things like that on Patreon because these are people who like they know your stuff, they love your stuff, so they'll read the thing first, and if they have questions, then they'll ask you.
Yeah. It
Mhm.
restores your faith in humanity a little bit. But no, I would just imagine it's a very feel good situation
Yes.
where you feel like you're appreciated, and these are the people who really love what you do. And we all know when we create consistently, particularly when you have to create as part of your job and it's not a hobby,
Yes.
there's days where you wake up and you're like, I'm not feeling it today. I don't want to do this, or you're really down on what you're putting out there or whatever. And it's nice to have that group of people who have your back, which is, I would assume, what patrons do for you.
Yes,
They're the people there
absolutely.
who kind of act as a support network without necessarily realizing they're even doing that. So,
Yes, totally.
all right. Well, thank you, Pi. This has been a great conversation. It was great to get to chat with you. And
Yeah, likewise.
I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. And I hope we can do it again sometime. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, everyone, that is this week's episode. We will be back again with a new episode next week, so I will talk to you all then. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.